everybody. Thanks for joining us. For those of you who are from outside of the university, the Textile Arts curriculum is an elective track in the BFA practice program that provides an interdisciplinary approach to the study of clothing and textiles. We offer courses in weaving, surface design, sewn construction, and dress history that encourages students to develop portfolios for a variety of applications in apparel, costume, textiles, and contemporary art. Beginning in fall 2024, we will offer a sustainable fashion minor. Yay! This is one of several free public lectures that we are hosting this term, where we bring in outside perspectives to supplement our course offerings. And we're so pleased that Karen could join us today. Karen Glass, Zero Waste gives us a really great insight into a different way of looking at the history of fashion. PSUtextilearts.com is where you'll see links to some of our other free programming, and maybe Allison, you could put that in the chat, where people can check out an archive of past lectures and also upcoming events. We're going to use the chat to take questions while Karen talks today, so please post your questions as we go, and we'll be sure to address as many of them as we can towards the end of this event. I also want to take a minute to acknowledge where we are, or where we're broadcasting from. Portland State University sits on ancestral homelands of the Multnomah, Kathlamet, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Clackamas, and other indigenous nations of the Upper Chinook region. We honor the indigenous people whose traditions and ancestral homelands we inhabit. It's important to acknowledge the ancestors of this place and to recognize that we are here because of the sacrifices forced upon them. We honor their legacy, their lives, and their descendants today.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Karen, for agreeing to be here and adjusting your schedule to be able to postpone until we got out of our ice storms. Very much appreciated. So welcome, and please let us know how we can think about fashion from your perspective.
Sure. So first, it's my turn to express some gratitude for being here, and take a moment to disengage from what you're doing and see if you can put your attention on this. There's a lot of deep work. There's not a lot of spoken word. The first part of the presentation is primarily visual. And I'm going to go ahead and screen share us. So it's just taking a minute, seconds actually.
Yeah, it shows.
All right. Now we're going to make a switch. We're going here. So, okay. What we're going to look at today, of course, is the no bias story. And just so that we're all clear what no bias is, it's a series, and I could consider it to be conceptual fashion art. So the presentation, it has two parts. The backstory of the No Bias series it's how the work evolved from apparel to art. And this part is primarily a visual narrative. It has some reading of which I'll do out loud just to pace the pages. And the second part is the series canvases with few visuals and more dialogue from me, but not a lot, that will then lead into dialogue with you, because I think it has critical value in this moment in time that we spend dialogue together on this subject. So a fashion concept can explore an idea, an abstract, or a social theme. It then gives that idea or that theme an identity And we're going to look at that within the presentation. And then the next step in building a fashion concept is that you execute design ideas that express that concept. And that's not only what you're going to see in the first part, but you'll especially see it in the No Bias series. So the No Bias concept explores social identity using gender as its medium. So give that a little bit of thought as we work through this presentation, and then maybe we can readdress it afterwards in our dialogue session. One thing that's very important, can you guys see the bottom of the screen, or am I down there?
Annan's camera little profile thing is blocking part of the visual.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
I'm moving it around. Okay, so it's gonna take up some of the visuals, but we'll make it work. So what I want to really be clear about, that this work is not about stylized gender. It's about gender defining style. How does gender in fashion apparel define style over time and now in contemporary times? And also, it's an expression of that social position. So here we start to get into the backstory, okay? The overture to No Bias. When I started the brand, the business, the endeavor, the enterprise of zero waste, what was most important to me to express was to live life with fewer things of greater value, to find greater value in the act of reusing and repurposing and recycle. Remember, guys, this was 2015. Almost 9 years ago. It was February 2015. So at that time, people weren't even clear or didn't have exposure to what even upcycle meant. Something else that had critical value was raising awareness of compassion for humanity and for social service. Social impact, the rise of social impact it's still growing, and now it's working. It's growing exponentially, but at that time it still had a lot of grassroots elements. So I wanted to express this in a way that was intimate for me, so that I could show it to other people, but I also wanted to touch people with very impactful imagery. Part of that for me was that we all have to openly express the beauty of intentional diversity, not only in us humans, but this is a cosmic concept. Diversity, especially intentional diversity, it helps us thrive. It helps our universe thrive. It helps our planet thrive. It helps our humanity thrive. It helps everything around us grow, evolve, and become better. So there's a couple dynamics happening in this image. One is the artifact itself. There's one artifact. It's one series. It has multiple connections, not only with all of these different women, but also in that the way that we processed the artifact. The woman third from the left, Elizabeth, is wearing a jacket cut with the full artifact. meaning every single piece of it, every single arm, sleeve, pocket, everything is from the artifact. Then Jessica on the far left is wearing the negative space of the cut of Elizabeth's jacket. And then Tanya in the center, and the second from the left, she's wearing the bits and pieces that were left. And then Micah's mother on the right, which I forget her name now, it's been 9 years. She's wearing not only the pieces
Karen,
left
might have
over.
lost your sound.
Okay.
Oh, wait, I think you're back now. Great, thank you. Yeah, we were just talking about the negative space when we.
Yes, so Jessica was wearing the first negative space cut on the far left. And then Tanya, who's second from the left, she is wearing the negative space from that cut. And then Micah's mother on the far right, Micah was a mentee of mine, and I've forgotten her name because we've lost touch over the last decade. She is wearing not only the negative space from that third cut, but also another piece of an obi that was included into this collection that was all acquired at the same time. So in this page, we look at what the guiding principles are. A life, meaning not only my life, but hopefully the life of those that choose to live by such principles. How an artist defines a theme, a concept, a brand, and a business. Fashion, art, environment, society. In a growing, caring economy. This is a body of work that's committed to changing the paradigms by which we live and view life. I'm considering this to be a meta perspective because it is the movement of society that we're currently engaged in. So I gave a screen or two to metamodernism so that we can unpack it a bit. And if there's any dialogue that's needed afterwards, we can get into that. So what is metamodernism? In my opinion, it's self-referring, it's directing our attention inwardly, it's reflecting on ourselves and projecting that self back into the world. It constitutes a global community of self-referring expressionists. Essentially, we're a collective selfie. And the meta high points I'll go through quickly, just so that you have some idea of where this work is coming from, because I consider all of this work to be very metamodern. It's about metacognition, thinking about our thinking, being aware that we are aware, meta-sensing the impact of our emotions on our thinking. And it's important to realize that just because something stirs negative emotions does not necessarily make it bad. Metaethics, what's good, what's bad. Personal accountability, a belief in the progress of humanity. Enter the age of mindfulness. Why is it so important? Because the greater our awareness, the greater our intention, the more we can do, the more that we can evolve. It helps us to elevate our desire for development and progress. So meta-constructing, from deconstruct to reconstruct, is what No Bias is really about: to reuse, repurpose, redefine, recycle, upcycle, redo, to take the waste to take what we've considered to be waste over the last century nearly, and use it for purpose. So you're going to start to see an aesthetic developing here, and part of that aesthetic is old is new is old, Both are valid, both can be juxtapositioned, and both can be integrated. I call this growth from subtraction, and the image speaks very much to that, because what we did was we took all of the leftover pieces and we turned them into a type of ornamentation, and therefore we saw that a new aesthetic was emerging. This is one of my favorite slides. As metamodernists, we're looking at ourselves and our values. We're redefining them through fashion, art, and purpose. With this work, with all of us that were engaged in this work, we considered it to be an aesthetic that evokes us to aspire. It evokes us to express our humanity and our compassion. And also, how are we going to define ourselves, not only in this very moment, but also as we evolve as a society? So we did some conceptual photography experimenting with redefining identity values without the bias of gender. So we take a moment and we just look at that photo, what everybody's doing in that photo. What are they playing with and what are they experimenting with? Expressing care and tenderness without the bias of gender. We see a masculine story. We see a feminine story. Masculine becomes feminine. Old is new again. So it was important for all of us at the time when we were doing this, that we look at how beauty was defined, and it was changing a lot. And gender change, I think, was a catalyst, at least for me it was in this work. So we're looking at redefining beauty with radical honesty. The juxtaposition of old, new, feminine, masculine, ugly, beautiful, beautiful, ugly, all of these things, mixing all of them up and looking at them from different perspectives so that we can understand more clearly who we are and where we're going. So the woman whose head is shaved is Tion. Here's Tion, dressed like a man. Her head is shaved not because by choice, but because at that time she was struggling with a sarcoma, of which she did indeed pass from. But you'll see her here, copying a masculine identity. And then here, very feminine. And here, complete transparency about who she is, what she's going through, and totally owning what she's wearing. She does it beautifully. So here we go. We are exploring the value of compassion. Why do I make the association, why do I put compassion, zero waste, and gender together? Because they're all at critical mass in our society and on our planet right now, and they all have a place to be, a place to express, and a place to integrate and help us. we're going to take a little moment or two and we're going to explore some of the artists that work at that time, who still do, but at that time were really exploring the same values and that really truly inspired this work. So Jessica, you saw in the photographs earlier, and I'll give you a moment just to read through that. So one of the things about Jessica, that when she said this to me, I never talk smack about anyone or anything. I thought, you know what? That needs to be in your profile somewhere, because it just has so much value when we engage as human beings, that we speak and we honor. We speak with respect and we honor one another. And also sexuality, orientation, it has nothing to do with perceived gender. You can see by her little bio there, she's a potter. She's also a blacksmith. I love pounding and forging metal, and I find tenderness in forming clay that's feminine. Here's a little bit of her work. Some of her blacksmith work on the right and some of her pottery on the left. A little bit more of her pottery. This is Rachel. So Rachel works primarily in porcelain. Her process, zero waste. Fine craft, really, more than a visual artist. And she's got multiple identities there. She's a mold maker, a printmaker, a storyteller, a naturalist, a yogi, and at that time, a new mom. Some of her work. Okay, Igor. Very intense, but brilliant. He's a studio artist, provocateur by any and every means. He explored human nature and sexuality. Very, very, very direct approach, very graphic approach. Very involved still in social justice, a very critical thinker, worked in a lot of different forms of media. He liked working in found object, and I think that's why the two of us gravitated towards each other. Unbelievable installation artist with such a meta perspective and could build experience like very few people I've ever met. So here's a portrait that he did, actually, of Jessica. This piece of work was at the Atlanta Film Festival. It's so interesting because what he did was he took the last scene of Tarkovsky's film Nostalgia, and he created externally around the projection of that film, he created the environment and the set of the film so you could walk into this set. It was hot, it was August, but he created a cold, snowy night that was happening exactly the same way in that scene of the film. Okay, then Shauna. The fabulous Shauna Robbins. I admire her because she's taken me to so many different spiritual dimensions, and her work is pretty fabulous, as you'll see. I'll give you a moment to read about it. This is part of her series. Really, really beautiful conceptual installation artist. This piece I think you'll really relate to. Then there's Luga. The sculpture he did was made all from pasta waste. he now is his primary income source is he's a chef. Luca would take natural pieces of wood or whatever he could find in the environment, create sculptures with them. He'd take cast off metal and pieces. And I'm sorry, in Lumiere, he took pieces of the muslin from our studio factory and built them into a visual narrative using cast off sheet metal. Here's one of his pieces with one of the zero waste pieces from the Venus series. This is Lauren Betty. A highly emotional individual, but extremely talented. I'll give you a moment to read about her. Scale of this work is pretty impressive. The texture of it is quite beautiful, actually. She works in all abstract forms. So I put in this group of performance artists, movement artists, actually, because it was a collaboration. Glow ATL is a movement troupe that was housed at the Goat Farm, and y'all can look up the Goat Farm in Atlanta because that's where the studio factory was for Zero Waste, and all of the artists that you see in this all had studios or living spaces or both at the time, and this was a collaboration with our studio factory, Zero Waste, along with Glow ATL and the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra. And what the movement artists were looking for was body wear that could blend in to their own skin color. So we did well for the most part. Some of them, it's hard even to see that they actually have the body wear on, especially on their legs and the woman in the center. But all of this, of course, was driven by different types of light. So in natural light, it would change. Under the lights at the studio orchestra, the colors change. It was really fascinating work. I was happy to be a part of it. So if we've learned anything in the last couple slides, it's about what Zero Waste Karen Glass was really about and what the No Bias series is really about. It's about fashion, art, and social voice. And this is some of Conrad's work. He was a student at SCAD at the time. And we wanted to do a series of work that was inspired not only by the artists' work, but also by Italian artist. I forgot. It'll come to me, and I'll come back to it with you. So now we're going to start to look at how the Zero Waste brand and how, as an artist, I moved from fashion apparel to conceptual art. Here we see Jessica again. And she was really the primary muse for this work because she was so open about her body shape, her own identity, switching from any identity we would ask her to embody at the time. And the photographer actually said during this shoot, he said, you know, I'm having a difficult time because I find her to be very intimidating. So it'll be interesting for me to get your reflections on some of the images that Jessica's been in throughout this presentation. Here's Jessica again. So I'm moving into a train of thought that I hope you'll go with me on, that I'm asking you all to be conscious of and experiment with your identity. In this moment, if you can, absolutely, but at any period of life that you're in, always ask yourself, am I fulfilling the vision I have for myself of my identity? And how am I projecting that out into the world? Because the clothes that we wear, the gestures that we take on, the choices that we make that define those things are all part of our identity, and they all contribute to our life in society and how we manage that life from a point of respect to all the things that live and breathe and thrive and flourish around us. So now we're going to get more into the prelude to no bias. And here you have a group of women who all do indeed have different, I'll say, sexual identities, not necessarily gender identities, but they're all uniting and coming together to express themselves as they would choose to express themselves in a masculine mixed with feminine identity. So here you have women expressing their masculinity, and now you have women expressing their masculinity, doing a very feminine thing. They're all fully captivated by what's happening with Cora's lipstick. Cora's on the far right. And here you have Jessica and Cora expressing masculine identity. And here you have them expressing feminine identity. I love how Cora looks like a goddess here. Here, Allie and Steph. When I ask anyone to explore relationship beyond tradition, it's not just about gender. It's also about identity. And it's also about the relationship that we have with other humans, with the natural world, and also with the material world, the objects that you have in your life, the clothes that you wear, even your hair, how you choose to wear it. What relationships do you have with all of these things? So here's the beginning of, on the left, the Shanghai jacket that became part of the installation at Apparel. Here's what the jackets looked like before they went up on canvases and started to get manipulated. So the series, the No Bias series, is truly, really about juxtaposition of gender, circa social position, and culture. Now we're going to move into the series. So this next image isn't exactly aesthetically fabulous, but it's very functional because it puts all of the series in one place at one time, and we don't have that. We don't have that capacity. We're not in that capacity right now. So what's important in this series, as I said, juxtaposition. We're going to go back and we're going to look at that again. Juxtaposition of gender, circa social position, and culture. Each series tells a small story. The title is very telling. When I first started this, what was important for me was that it expressed humility, and that it also, the series, express the importance of embellishment in aesthetics, and how do we define gender, or how do we assign gender through an embellishment, and how that happened over centuries, really. So I'm going to just read the titles here, and then we're going to move on to each one, and then we're going to go into some dialogue together. So, bound and done up. You can see the constriction, you can see the containment in this canvas. The next coming undone because the waists are starting to relax a bit. They're starting to tell more of a story. The third canvas, they are completely and fully relaxed, yet all the shoulders, they remain sloped in humility. Fourth, fleur-de-lis. Not only are the waists relaxed and straight, but now they're starting to round out and become a little fuller. They're expressing the acceptance of fuller figuredness in our society. The same thing goes with the fifth one. Suffragette, or suffragette city, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go into each individual canvas. And the last one, unbound, rebound, and redone. As far as we've come, we're going to continue to rebound. It's the life cycle pattern that we engage in on this planet, in this universe. And then, of course, the redoing of it. We do it, we go back to it, but then we do it again. And hopefully every time that we do that thing, we learn more from it, and we engage in that little bit of microviolence a little bit less. Because I do consider the expression of, we're going to move on to the next one here. I'll move it over there. So, bound and done up. That waist on the left, so tight, so constricted, so contained. It tells a story of what the feminine spirit has gone through over centuries. We contain it. But then on the right, you see we adorn it, we tie it up in a little bow, we prettify it, we say that it's okay. But we've learned now that it's not so okay. Now we take a close-up here. So on the left, you have a close-up of that waist being as done and as tight and as bound as it possibly can be. And on the right, a manipulated Victorian era photograph that's expressing exactly the same thing. And we move on and we look at this bound waist. That waist is probably there on the left, probably 19 inches. And if any of you have ever seen the movie Gone with the Wind, that was Scarlett O'Hara's ideal waist size, pre-pregnancy. We also look on the right, you can see what it's done, or what it has done to our anatomy, our internal anatomy. Why do we bind? Why do we do this? We're gonna ask you that question when we get into the dialogue, because I'd like to hear some opinions. Now you see us starting to come undone. We're starting to open ourselves up. We're adorning a little bit more. Every single aspect of all of the work that I do, it has purpose. And I won't get into the deep detail of what that is, but I did mention to Allison in the beginning that if y'all would like the full narrative of the series that's also currently showing at Parallax, we can make that work for you. What's important to note about the right figure is that it's starting at the waist to express some chaos. We're starting to let go. Are we sure we want to let go? Oh boy, I'm a little nervous. We're all a little nervous. So there's a lot of things happening in both of these images. But as we look at the right going into the next one, we're releasing the feminine. It's starting to think, uh-oh, women are starting to come undone. They're starting to become unbound. How is this going how's this going to lay out in society? I want you to keep in mind, no matter how it lays out, what's important. We express, we maintain, we keep about ourselves, our humility. It's so important, especially when we live in a massive engagement of narcissistic behavior. How do we stay humble? How do we maintain what's intentional, what will help us all, what will give our lives purpose? So now we get into bedazzled and be done. Okay. Looking at ornamentation, looking at adornment from a perspective that anything goes. However you want to adorn yourself, regardless of how you identify with your gender, enjoy it, because it gives us so much pleasure to adorn ourselves. It gives us so much pleasure to explore color and shape and form and texture and stitch work and putting flowers on our body in various forms, whether it's in a textile form or whether it's a tiny little butterfly on our lapel. So I'm asking you now is, if the waist were cinched, would these be strictly feminine forms? How we're going to move into fleur-de-lis. Fleur-de-lis takes a little bit of a deeper, darker story. And I say darker because it expresses a little bit of the impact of patriarchal religion culture on fashion. There's a couple things happening here. One is that the reason it became fleur-de-lis is because of the shape the handkerchiefs started to take in this canvas, but also because of the history that the French had in fashion and in couture, and also because the history of French Catholicism and its influence on fashion, and its influence especially on how a gender became assigned to fashion. This is also a little 1960s story going on. Both of these jackets are from the 60s. And there was a lot of gender role-playing changing that was happening. Women were starting to leave the home, and they were becoming less domestic, and they were taking on more masculine roles. So there are those aspects of what's happening here. But there's also, as you're going to see, the influence of European religion, culture on gender fashion. But there's also a little story of hope. And that little story of hope is that medal, Catholic medal on the left, which is Saint Anne. And Saint Anne is considered the saint of hope. And there is more in the written narrative that gives a more complete story about religion, culture, and gender assignment, and the influence of that, not only in this work, but also on the period that the pieces were developed from. So here, the name, the reason that this was suffragette or suffragette city, as it was starting, this canvas was starting to develop. A dear sweet friend, she said, these women look like they could be, and she called them women. She said, these women look like they could be suffragettes. And I said, yeah, kind of, but a lot of mixed period circa. And I said, but I kind of dig where that name is coming from. And I like, because it keeps this loop of David Bowie's music, Suffragette City. It just kept playing over and over in my mind. It says, all right, this is what it's got to be. And you can read again, you can read more about it in the narrative. But you see on the left, you see a jacket from the 60s, the same story. You see a play, a different play of the value of expression with kerchiefs. And the reason I use them is because they have expressed so much. And I think that the kerchief alone could be a series of work, that it just expresses so much, not only in fashion and but it had great function. It became so ornamental. People used it to gesture for centuries. And the placement of it, whether it was in a pocket or in a sleeve, it had different forms of expression within different centuries and also within different decades. You know, even when I grew up, some members of my family would tuck their handkerchief into their sleeve. It was a way, it was a place to keep it, because we all use them at one time. Now we just use, well, I don't, but people generally use paper instead. And the last in the series, Unbound, Rebound, and Redone. How it came to be was, it's framed for closure, for one, but it's also opened on the top and the bottom, on the left and the right side, to express a continuum. This is the continuum of how we assign not only gender, but social position in apparel, and how we also, because of that, we commit little micro violences. We don't think that we do. Like, oh, it's just an image. Oh, it's just a stitch. But it's expressing that, still, that containment, that control, that constraint that we all feel we have to exercise. Yes, we have to exercise refrain. We don't want to hurt people, but there is a line between how we refrain from acting out and misbehaving, I'll say, and how we constrain. So on this, we're gonna move to the end, and then we're gonna open up some dialogue. So, no bias, an exploration into identity in fashion. And I thank you. And we're gonna call that the end. And I'm gonna get out of this.
Wonderful. Ah, so deep, such deep thought.
I hope it worked for everyone.
There are some questions that we can get started with. I think they're part of this conversation. Certainly in class, just before you started speaking, we were looking at late 19th century style, Western European styles. And you spoke so directly to some of the very things we were addressing in class. So it's just a really beautiful tie-in, how certain people were questioning even then through the aesthetic movement, etc., what it means to express oneself through dress. But let me ask you a question here from Annie. I recently heard the concept, we find our identity only after we lose it. And Annie writes, I would love to hear if you find this to be true, and how, if you do, that's translated through your art.
You have no idea, Annie, how relevant and how profound your question is to me, because Wow, this is very personal, but I think we're in a very safe space, and I think that art, in order for it to be expressed with great value, has to be personal, has to be intimate. So once I decided to move into conceptual art, what happened was a major shift in identity, and I gave up, gave away, sold little, but mostly gave away everything that I owned possession wise, except for what would fit in a small suitcase, everything. And I committed myself not only to a zero waste lifestyle, I still have very few possessions, but also to bringing in my own humanity, my own identity into my work. So identity is critical. It's critical at this time that we experiment with it. And yes, indeed, losing what I thought was my identity and having to build another one is very much a part of not only the no bias work, but you can see how it led in, the beginning work led into that as well. That's a great question. Thank you. I hope I answered it. If I didn't, ask it again.
Okay.
Sure.
And there's a question from Alex that is questioning here. When working towards gender neutrality, as your project states, how do you toe the line between feminine and masculine, or otherwise go outside of it, without putting gendered clothing on visually opposite gendered bodies? Is there more to making garments gender neutral than adding typically perceived notions of masculinity or femininity to either style of garment?
Brilliant question. And it was what I said in the very beginning about this isn't about creating style from already a gender assigned clothing, although some of the images were how do we unpack your question? There was another part of the Zero Waste Project that was all the knitwear, and the knitwear was it was apparent that it had no assigned gender, in that the forms could be worn by any body type, and the styling the same. However, that said, the No Bias series is about taking all the things that are typically feminine and typically masculine and bringing them together in one visual statement and saying, this is okay. Take a masculine body and adorn it up, cinch the waist, highlight the waist, add lace, all these things that we have already pre-assigned gender to, and say, okay, now look at it. And look at it without the filter of gender assignment. Adorn your body in the way that you want, wear the colors that you want, gesture your clothes in the way that you want, but try to do it in such a way that you're not doing it as masculine, feminine, a combination, a mix-up, all of these things. I just love that because it's beautifully colored and it's floral and it's graceful. And there's no gender assignment in that. So there's a couple different, I know there's a couple different answers there, but essentially it's all those things. What this work is saying, all those things that we do, they're all acceptable. Does that answer your question, Alex?
We'll see. And please, you can put more comments in the chat if you have a deeper question, if we didn't quite get to it in this dialogue. There's a couple of questions that I'm going to kind of combine, and they're about materials. Dion and Lacey and Rowan in a minute. And here's a question. What was the most challenging part of using scrap material and reconstructing them? And how do you select your materials?
Mm. First question, I'll speak to selecting materials. I'm very drawn to muslin. I always have been, raw cotton. And I think because it established my love of couture in the very beginning. This is how I was trained in fashion. I was trained in French couture. So we created everything in muslin first. And then we moved from there. And I just always loved it. And I've always had it in my life. So it's apparent, obviously, in all of the work that I do. But the archives, I didn't select them. That said, I was drawn to them. They were part of a collection that was needful at the time for the houses that I was designing for. So if we were designing, there was a time when Asian culture, right after Hong Kong left China, that Asian influence in fashion skyrocketed. Galliano was dressing red carpet women in chisoms and oriental embroideries, and it was big. So we collected those artifacts at that time and put it into the work. The same thing with India was happening. So we did that. Now that boho is just redone and redone and redone and redone. So to answer to distill down the answer in that the artifacts were collected for specific design houses. Yes, I'm drawn to them, but I found ways then to create narrative, and how that narrative happens and how I assemble that is because my love for a visual narrative, for precision, and for how to make all the pieces fit together so that they work from my perspective.
And Rowan asked a little bit more detailed question on that same subject.
Sure.
More technical question. Were the materials, were the garments, the original garments, completely taken apart, then cut from patterns? And also, what do the basting stitches represent to you?
Sure.
And do you think it's possible to take this wabi-sabi approach to the mainstream and mass media?
Absolutely. I'll answer that question first. Absolutely, I do. When we were living in Atlanta and working in Atlanta, it was the form of art and form of life that we embodied. And Atlanta's a good city. If y'all ever get there, it's a great city to experience that raw type of imperfection, beautiful imperfection that's in art. And is it mainstream? Depends on what you mean by mainstream. Is it mass fashionable, mass fashion-able? No, it's not. Is it an independent line that can be successful? Absolutely. I think that it can be. And both. Zero, to answer your question, Zero Archive is all from scratch work, all pattern work. But including all of the archive cut work and the use of negative space. The use of negative space was not patterned only because it was used as a whole negative space. None of it was ever cut away. If it was the inside of an arm side, then that inside negative space would go into the narrative. But the 02 work, which is primarily the No Bias series, the only thing that might be patterned would be if we reshaped the sleeve, but then it was all draping. It was not patterned. So I think I answered all parts of the question, right?
Yeah.
Oh, the stitching. The stitching again goes back to my love of couture, and everything was by hand. We tailored everything by hand, and I did men's bespoke when I first started my career. So I worked a lot in all types of all the stitching related to handwork, and I happen to love handwork. And within the studio, we developed actually a repertoire of hand stitching that we used. And that's one of the things that I carried with me in my white suitcase that left Atlanta.
Z asked a question, what part do you enjoy working on the most? And I think you might have just answered that with the hand stitching, or maybe you have a different answer.
The work itself, yes. What I enjoy the most is the ideation. Because I'm in my head a lot. And the work is primarily in my head and in my heart. But the ideation, really, it's like you have this, you see this thing, you have this idea, and then, oh my gosh, here we are. Now it's out. Now it's executed. The process as well.
And the collaboration, it seems, is key
True.
too. Yes.
You know, I think that's a lifelong pursuit. I'm always looking for community. But everyone is right now. I'm not ahead of the curve in that.
Rachel asks a specific question about one of your pieces in the Parallax Gallery exhibit. Why did you choose the specific Shanghai jacket to pair with the antebellum skirt? Was there something specific that drew you to it?
Yeah. The Shanghai jacket was the very first jacket that we all put our hands on in the studio. I liked the cut of this jacket. It was very sophisticated. It had a really, really beautiful aesthetic. It had like a designer suit aesthetic to it. If that can resonate with any of you. Just cut beautifully, fit beautifully. Everything about it worked. And then the lining, as it came from the Shanghai market, the old market in Shanghai, and that is in the narrative also, if you want to get the narrative. And why the pairing? The pairing is because what I airlifted off of was how antebellum fashion was presented most often. It was a dark jacket that was longer, generally speaking, than the jackets of the period, slightly somber, and it was done up with lace, and the lining tended to take on a story because there were a lot of women in the South during this period that had money, that their primary occupation was hand stitching. So all the embroidery that goes along with the inside of that jacket, although it's from a different culture, it meshed with how antebellum style, how I could see antebellum style updated, although I would never want to have that period repeated in any culture ever again.
Yeah, that piece also was beautifully photographed and in the article on Edge Expo. So
Yeah,
a lot of people had a good
it's a
understanding.
great article. Yeah, I thought Rhonda did a great job.
Yeah,
everybody did a fabulous job.
You had a couple of words in the beginning of your presentation I was curious about: metamodern, metacognition, perhaps other words beginning with meta. And I'm curious, did you coin these terms or did they come from somewhere else?
That's a great question. Remember this this was 2015 where we started this. And I had a sense, this was before Facebook was renamed, and it was before there was any dialogue. I mean, right before there was any dialogue of metaverse. But the word, or the idea of metadata, I was exploring, and I thought, I wonder what this means. So, and I was working on a presentation to a group in New York about futurism, and I thought, so how are we moving from a modern society to a postmodern society? So postmodern, and I thought, well, what really is that? And I said, it's very, we're in a time where we're really exploring who we are, what we're doing. We're becoming very aware that we're actually doing this. We are looking at ourselves in the same way that metadata analysis looks at the data and gains perspective. So we're like, it's like a 30,000 foot perspective, but yet we're up there at 30,000, but we also know that when we're looking down there at ground zero, we know that perspective, we know both of them. So it's a removal, but a containment at the same time. It's perspective. Yeah. So then I did a search for metamodern, and I couldn't find anything. 2 months later, as I was going into the presentation, I did a search for metamodern, and I found an image of Shia LaBeouf with a bag over his head. I'm a metamodernist. And I went, okay, there it is. Because this is really how concepts emerge. And now we have the beautiful advantage of seeing how thought movement occurs because we have the internet. You know, you do a search week 1, there's nothing there. Week 10, it's there. It's like, okay, it's starting to filter down into people's consciousness, and we're becoming aware of such a thing now. And every once in a while, you'll hear somebody use the word meta. Oh, that's very meta of you, you know. There was a particular body of work, I forget his name now, and I think it might have been the first time I ever heard it publicly called out, metamodernism. He was in a show. He did a show about Atlanta. He was on Saturday Night Live. Maybe some of y'all, if any of you can think of it. Oh well. In the way he renamed himself, there was something Gambino in it. I forget, but it was a very Donald Glover. Thank you very much. Childish Gambino. Yeah. And I saw this work and I went, holy, this is metamodernism. It was spot on. It was perfect. And if you all want to go back and watch the video, because everything about it was exactly what was happening at that very moment in time and in that work. And he captured so many different nuances and expressions of society, but in a very meta way. Yeah.
That's a very profound way maybe to begin to wrap this up.
Sure.
Yeah, lots of food for thought there. Oh.
I hope so. And I hope that, I hope I didn't overwhelm you, but I also, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I tend to love that less can actually, or that more can actually help define something. So even though I do indeed live a zero waste lifestyle.
Very, yeah, rich in thought.
Yeah, there you go.
Just one more time, the cloth construct culture exhibit If you haven't seen it yet, it's really a must see. Today and tomorrow are the last days of it. And here's the address in the chat. So you could see some of the pieces that we've looked at today in Karen's talk in person. There's a real different experience of them in 3 dimensions. So definitely want to suggest that. Thank you so much, Karen. This has been
Oh my gosh, thank you
really
also.
meaningful and deeply resonant. I think I really appreciate you and the work that you do.
Thank you. And if you, and if you want to, if people want copies of either, I know you're going to make a recording available, but if they want copies of the PDF copy of the narrative of the show at Parallax with the dialogue, or if they want a PDF copy of the presentation, just let me know how I can facilitate that.
All right. Very, very welcome. Thank you very much. And
Alrighty
there's
then.
nice thank yous in the chat. Some love showing up for you there. So
I love you all back.
yeah. So thank you. Thank you for engaging with us. This has been really memorable and a lot to think about going forward.
I wish you all well. And I say goodbye.
Thank you,
Yes.
Karen.
Hey, hi. Good to see you.
We're honored with your body of work. It's amazing.
Oh,
And thank you for the presentation. It was perfect.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I wish you all well, and I send you lots of love out in Portland. I hope I hope to get there sometime. You know, there's a lot of talk about Portland right now. I think it would be an interesting place to be.
Yeah.
Be well, be prosperous, and be creative, y'all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. All right. Thanks. That's been a nice interaction. So thanks to everybody who posted a question in the chat. And yeah, there's content for you on modules to look at today for today's lesson if you're in my class. And otherwise, bid you a good day.
Thank you, Ann. And
thank you, Rhonda, who's a curator of the exhibit at Parallax, curator extraordinaire. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Karen's class to us for making it possible.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.